From her attic window, Marie Dubois watched the world unfold, a miniature stage seen through the diamond panes of her humble home. But her gaze rarely lingered on the bustling street below or the familiar market square. Instead, it was drawn invariably to the west, where the grand mansion of Madame LaLaurie loomed, a monstrous, elegant shadow against the perpetually bruised sky. Even from this distance, its sheer scale was daunting, a hulking structure of pale brick and wrought iron, draped in the heavy green of vines that seemed more like grasping fingers than decorative foliage. Sunlight rarely seemed to fully illuminate its facade, leaving it in a perpetual state of twilight, an imposing secret in the heart of the city. One afternoon, a clatter of hooves on cobblestones announced a familiar procession. Marie leaned closer, pressing her nose against the cool glass. The LaLaurie carriage, gleaming with polished dark wood and silver fittings, rolled into view, drawn by two magnificent bay horses whose breath plumed in the crisp air. Inside, framed by the velvet-lined window, sat Madame LaLaurie herself. Even at a distance, she was breathtaking, a vision of impeccable taste and wealth. Her silk gown shimmered, and a delicate feather curled from her elaborate bonnet, catching the light like a jewel. Her beauty was undeniable, a sharp, classical perfection that commanded attention. But it was her face that always gave Marie pause. Beneath the perfectly arched brows, and the serene, almost regal set of her lips, there was an unmistakable chill. Her eyes, even from afar, seemed to hold a distant, glacial quality, like two chips of ice, reflecting the world, without truly seeing it. She never smiled. Not truly. Not with the warmth that Marie saw in her own grandmother's face, or even in the fleeting expressions of strangers passing in the street. Madame LaLaurie merely acknowledged the world, a silent declaration of her elevated status, before the carriage swept past, leaving behind only the fading scent of expensive perfume and the lingering echo of its passage. Marie sighed. A small puff of condensation on the glass. She often wondered what it was like inside that formidable house. Her grandmother had warned her of the LaLaurie's reputation for being fancy folk, a phrase delivered with a knowing look that Marie hadn't quite understood. But it was not the grandeur that piqued Marie's curiosity, so much as the quiet children she sometimes glimpsed in the mansion's meticulously kept garden. Today, two of them were visible, weeding around a bed of vibrant crimson roses. One was a boy, no older than Marie herself, perhaps 10 or 11, his small frame hunched over a trowel. The other was a girl, even younger, maybe 7 or 8, carefully plucking at stubborn weeds near a stone fountain. They moved with a practiced, somber efficiency, their movements devoid of the usual childish exuberance. No whispered jokes, no chasing butterflies, no bursts of laughter. They simply worked, their heads bowed, their faces obscured by the shadows of their straw hats. Marie watched them for a long time, her heart aching with an unfamiliar sorrow. She saw their thin clothes, their dusty hands, the way their shoulders seemed perpetually slumped. She had never once seen any of the LaLaurie children smile, not a single genuine, unburdened smile. They were always quiet, always busy, always seeming to carry a weight far too heavy for their small shoulders. What kind of home was it, Marie wondered, where children never smiled? A shiver, not entirely from the cool window pane, traced its way down her spine. The elegant mansion, with its grand facade and silent working children, held a secret. She was certain of it, a secret that felt cold and vast, like the depths of Madame LaLaurie's unreadable eyes. Whispers in the wind. Marie hunched closer to the cold pane of her attic window, the glass humming faintly against her cheek. From this vantage point, the LaLaurie mansion seemed to loom larger than ever, its intricate ironwork stark against the bruised twilight sky. A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air snaked up her spine when she thought of the children within those walls, their listless faces, the way they moved like shadows, never laughing. The next morning the market square buzzed with a different kind of energy, a low, persistent hum of hushed voices. Marie, sent for fresh herbs, tried to blend into the stream of shoppers, but her ears strained to catch the fragments of conversation that floated on the humid air. Near the bread stall, two women leaned together, their wide skirts brushing the cobbles. "Did you hear it last night, Sylvie?" one whispered, her voice barely audible above the clamor of a vendor hawking fish. A sort of thudding, and that creaking, like a great weight being dragged across the floorboards. Sylvie wrung her hands. It's been weeks now, Marguerite, and the sounds aren't the worst of it. My cousin's boy, Jean-Luc, he was hired to mend a fence last month. Never came home. His mother went to the mansion, Madame LaLaurie herself answered. Said he'd finished his work and left. Marguerite scoffed softly. Left? Without his wages? Without even a goodbye to his own mother? That woman. She just looks at you with those cold eyes, like you're a fly on the wall. Marie's basket felt heavy, the rosemary suddenly smelling of something acrid. She moved past them, pretending to examine a pile of ripe figs, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Jean-Luc, she'd seen him often, a cheerful lad with calloused hands. To simply vanish, it wasn't the first time she'd heard such talk. Workers, mostly those from the fringes of town, taken on for small tasks, who then ceased to be seen or heard from again. The whispers always led back to the imposing residence on Royal Street. Later that afternoon, as Marie helped her grandmother shell peas on the porch, the older woman reached out, her fingers gently closing around Marie's wrist. Grandma Elodie's eyes, usually twinkling with warmth, were shadowed with a rare seriousness. Marie, ma petite, I've noticed you watching that house, the LaLaurie place. Marie started, her cheeks flushing. Only sometimes, Maman Elodie. The children, they seem so sad. Her grandmother sighed, a deep, weary sound. Some things are best left undisturbed, child. There are currents in this city, strong and dark, that pull you under before you even know you're swimming. That house. It has a chill to it that even the summer sun can't thaw. Promise me, Marie, keep your distance. Don't go near that place, not for curiosity, not for anything. Her grip tightened, a silent plea in her touch. There's a feeling about it, a wrongness, like a sickness that infects the very air. Promise me. Marie looked into her grandmother's earnest face, the unspoken fear in her gaze clear. A shiver traced its way down Marie's spine, a stark contrast to the comforting warmth of Maman Elodie's hand. She nodded slowly, the image of Jean-Luc's kind smile fading into the ominous shadows of the LaLaurie Mansion. I promise, Maman Elodie. The words felt heavy, a vow made against an unknown, lurking dread. The girl who fell. From her cramped attic window, Marie Dubois often watched the grand, wrought-iron gates of the LaLaurie Mansion. It wasn't the opulence that held her gaze, though the house gleamed like a jewel in the New Orleans sun, but the peculiar stillness that enveloped it. The LaLaurie children, usually a parade of well-dressed miniatures, seemed to carry a perpetual shadow in their eyes, their laughter a sound Marie rarely heard. Today, an oppressive quiet hung in the humid air, broken only by the distant calls of street vendors. Marie was tracing the intricate patterns of the ironwork with her finger, when a sudden, shrill shriek tore through the silence. It was a sound of pure terror, followed by a sharp, cracking snap. Her breath caught in her throat. She pressed her face closer to the glass, her heart hammering against her ribs. Below, in the manicured courtyard, Madame Delphine LaLaurie moved like a vengeful storm. Her usually immaculate silk dress billowed around her, but her face was a mask of cold fury, her dark eyes blazing. In her hand a long, slender whip snaked, its tip still vibrating from the last strike. Ahead of her, a small, wiry girl, no older than Marie herself, scrambled across the flagstones. L.I.A. Marie recognized her from the few times she'd seen her fetching water or scrubbing the steps. Leah's dress was torn, her hair disheveled, and a fresh red welt marred her bare arm. The crack came again, slicing the air, and Lia cried out, a guttural sob. She darted towards the mansion's side entrance, her small legs pumping, but the door was locked. Panic contorted her face. Madame LaLaurie, her stride long and purposeful, gained on her. Lia glanced desperately around, her eyes wide, searching for any escape. Her gaze fell upon an open window on the second floor, a sliver of darkness in the ornate facade. With a surge of adrenaline, Lia launched herself at the trellis, climbing the wall beneath the window. Her fingers found purchase on the gnarled vines, her feet scrambling for footholds. She scaled it with astonishing speed, a desperate, silent prayer in her every movement. Madame LaLaurie paused, her lips pressed into a thin, venomous line, watching the girl's ascent with an unnerving calm. Lia reached the windowsill, her small body trembling with exertion. She tried to pull herself inside, but her strength faltered. Just as her fingers slipped, a sharp, cruel tug from below. Perhaps the whip had caught her dress, or the trellis itself gave way under the sudden stress. Marie watched, paralyzed, as Leah's grip failed. Time stretched, a horrifying eternity. Lia hung, suspended for a moment, her eyes wide, locked on something Marie couldn't see. Then she plummeted. A soft, sickening thud echoed, barely audible over Marie's own choked gasp. Then, silence. Utter, profound silence, broken only by the distant chirp of a bird. Madame LaLaurie stood motionless for a long moment, her whip drooping to the ground. Then, with a chilling nonchalance, she turned and glided back into the house, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind her. The silence did not last. A neighbor, drawn by Leah's earlier screams, emerged tentatively from a side street. Another and another. Word spread like wildfire through the quarter. Soon, a gathering formed outside the LaLaurie gates. Shopkeepers abandoned their counters, housewives clutched their rosaries, and street children pressed against their parents' legs. Their faces were a mixture of shock, sorrow, and a simmering indignant anger. All eyes were fixed on the imposing mansion, its windows now reflecting the setting sun like cold, unblinking eyes. A collective murmur, low and resonant, rose from the crowd, a question without an answer, a grief too deep for words. Above them, in her attic, Marie shivered, the cold dread seeping into her bones. A lady's power. The boy's fleeting form, seared onto the fragile film of Marie Dubois' memory, lingered. From her attic eyrie, the vibrant street life below, once a rich tapestry, now seemed despoiled. Rue Royale lay hushed, a strange stillness portending untold horrors, a palpable residue of the violence she had witnessed. Days later, the opulent LaLaurie carriage glided through the cobbled thoroughfare. Madame Delphine LaLaurie, serene within, her gloved hands resting on a silk reticule, alighted at the cabildo. Her posture regal, her gown a whisper of expensive taffeta, she entered the dimly lit office, redolent with pipe tobacco and aged paper. There she conferred with the mayor and two other city council luminaries. Marie, en route to market, glimpsed her through the open doorway. Madame LaLaurie spoke, her voice a low, melodious murmur, utterly devoid of strain or remorse. She gestured occasionally with an elegant hand, her eyes, though shaded by her bonnet's brim, conveying an unshakable resolve. The men, their faces etched with concern, nodded, listened, and at length one offered a sympathetic inclination of his head. It was a tableau of power, subtle, yet absolute. The whispers began, a dry rustle at first, then swelling into an audible murmur in the bakeries, taverns, and along the bustling waterfront. "She paid them off, didn't she?" a fishmonger muttered, wiping his hands on a bloodied apron. "Another accident, they're calling it. As if that child just tumbled." A group of washerwomen, arms submerged in frothing tubs, exchanged knowing glances. "That woman has the devil's own luck, or the devil's own coin," one hissed, her knuckles white as she scrubbed a linen shirt. The general consensus, unspoken but deeply felt, was that justice had been bought, not served. The incident, rather than openly confronted, festered beneath the surface of polite society, a growing infection of resentment that spread through the humid air like a noxious vapor. For Marie, the news settled like a leaden weight in her chest. She had heard the official pronouncements. An unfortunate accident, a tragic fall, but she had witnessed it all. The desperate scramble, the whip's swift descent, the sickening trajectory. How could they simply dismiss it? How could she simply dismiss it? She paced her small attic room, the floorboards groaning under her agitated steps. Injustice burned within her, a raw, aching wound. The sun, a brazen eye in the azure sky, seemed to mock her with its indifference. She stared out at the LaLaurie Mansion, its elegant facade now appearing sinister, its windows like vacant, watchful eyes. The city, once a place of vibrant life and ordered society, now felt like a stage for a cruel, inexplicable play, where the powerful dictated the truth and the innocent suffered unseen. Her initial fear now mingled with a profound sense of disillusionment and a quiet, simmering anger. The air grew heavy with the unspoken truth. A suffocating blanket draped over the city, and Marie felt its oppressive weight more acutely than anyone. A new pair of eyes. The massive oak door, studded with black iron, groaned shut behind Auntie Eliza, engulfing her in the mansion's cool, mute embrace. The air, thick with old timber and a faint metallic tang, pressed in. She adjusted the basket on her hip, her knuckles stark white against the woven reeds. "Morning, Mum," she'd offered to the unsmiling woman who'd ushered her inside, a nameless figure. Eliza was merely another pair of hands, a fresh cog in the sprawling, affluent mechanism of the LaLaurie household. New Orleans still hummed with hushed accounts of the fire, the charred kitchen, the bodies unearthed. Yet Madame LaLaurie, serene and formidable, moved through society, her influence having burnished every rough edge, every official inquiry. Justice, it seemed, was a pliable commodity in this city. A younger maid, barely past girlhood, navigated Eliza through a maze of dimly lit passages to the newly appointed kitchen. It spanned larger than Eliza had anticipated, a subtle scent of ash lingering despite the fresh coat of paint. Pots and pans, gleaming like freshly minted coins, hung from their hooks. A fire crackled with cheerful abandon in the hearth, a stark counterpoint to the palpable tension clinging to the very stone. The existing kitchen staff, a scullery maid, a nimble boy for errands, and a man serving as a general aide, worked with a nervous efficiency, their gazes fixed downwards. No welcoming words were offered, only quick, apprehensive glances. Eliza, a woman who had witnessed much in her 5 decades, began her tasks with quiet resolve. She tied her apron, drew her favoured carving knife from her basket, and started preparing the morning's poultry. The rhythmic thud of her blade against the cutting board filled the space, until a faint, almost imperceptible sound drifted from the upper floors. A low moan, hastily stifled, followed by a dull impact, as if something weighty had been dropped. Eliza paused, her knife poised over a chicken. She subtly scanned her colleagues. The scullery maid flinched, eyes wide, before hunching lower over her scrubbing bucket. The young boy, mid-polish on a silver tray, froze, his knuckles white around the cloth. The factotum simply gazed into the flames, his face etched with weary resignation. No one spoke, no one acknowledged the sound. The ensuing silence proved even more disquieting than the noise itself. A second sound came, sharper this time, a choked cry, succeeded by a distinct cracking snap. It was fleeting, chillingly so. Then the oppressive quiet descended once more, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant, muted hum of the city beyond. Eliza's stomach knotted. She had served in many grand residences, encountered her share of eccentricities and domestic squabbles. But this felt different. The fear wasn't merely in the silence, it permeated the very air, a heavy shroud enveloping every soul within these walls. She observed the other servants, their movements stiff, their eyes averted, as if seeing would invite a terrible consequence. Eliza, though new, grasped one truth immediately. In this house, certain things were meant to remain unheard, unseen, and unmentioned. She retrieved her knife, her hands steady, but her mind now whirred with unasked questions, a fresh perspective observing a darkness long concealed. The locked attic. The scent of beeswax and ancient dust hung heavy in the air as Auntie Eliza, duster in hand, ventured higher into the LaLaurie Mansion than she had ever been permitted. Madame LaLaurie, following the recent incident and the convenient dismissal of any wrongdoing by the authorities, had decreed a thorough cleaning of the entire estate. This, Eliza suspected, was less about cleanliness, and more about asserting an iron grip, a public display of her untouchable status. The city whispered of bought justice, of a woman whose influence extended even to the very scales of law. Eliza ascended a narrow, winding staircase tucked away behind a tapestry, depicting a faded hunting scene. The steps creaked beneath her worn boots, a mournful symphony in the oppressive quiet. This part of the house felt forgotten, left to the slow decay of time. cobwebs thick and glistening like spun silver, draped from the ceiling beams. A faint, chill draught snaked through the unlit passages, raising goosebumps on Eliza's arms. At the very top, the staircase opened onto a small landing. 2 doors faced each other. One, a standard wooden panel, led to what appeared to be a storage room, filled with forgotten trunks and shrouded furniture. The other, however, was different. It was a formidable slab of dark, unvarnished oak, reinforced with thick iron bands that crisscrossed its surface like a grim embrace. A heavy, tarnished patent padlock, the size of Eliza's fist, secured it firmly. There was no keyhole visible, only a sturdy shackle clamped tight. The wood, despite its age, seemed incredibly robust, as if designed to withstand more than just the passage of time. A faint, metallic tang, almost like old blood, seemed to cling to the very surface of the door. A scent Eliza couldn't quite place, yet it stirred a deep unease within her as her fingers grazed the cold iron. A sudden, sharp voice sliced through the silence. "Eliza! What are you doing up here?" Madame LaLaurie stood at the bottom of the winding staircase, her silhouette framed against the dim light below. Her voice, though calm, held an undeniable edge of steel. Her usually serene features were taut, a barely concealed flicker of irritation in her dark eyes. She had moved with an unnatural swiftness, as if she had materialized from the very shadows. Eliza quickly withdrew her hand, curtsying deeply. "Forgive me, madam. I was merely following your instructions for a thorough cleaning. I believe this area was included." Madame LaLaurie ascended the stairs with deliberate steps, her silk gown rustling softly. She stopped a few feet from Eliza, her gaze fixed not on the maid, but on the formidable door. "This area," she stated, her voice dropping to a low, almost imperceptible murmur, "is not for cleaning. It is private. You are to stay away from the attic, Eliza. Understand?" The command was absolute, leaving no room for argument. Eliza met Madame LaLaurie's intense stare, a shiver running down her spine. "Yes, madam." "Perfectly." Madame LaLaurie lingered for a moment longer, her gaze still fixed on the door, a strange, possessive gleam in her eyes. Then, with a curt nod, she turned and descended the stairs, leaving Eliza alone once more with the locked, silent sentinel. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. The swift appearance of Madame LaLaurie, her uncharacteristic agitation, and the absolute prohibition, it all solidified a growing suspicion. What unspeakable secret lay behind that reinforced door? The faint, metallic scent seemed to grow stronger now. A whisper of something terrible. The city might have dismissed the recent deaths as an accident, but Eliza knew, with chilling certainty, that something far darker festered within the walls of the LaLaurie Mansion, and its heart, she now believed, was locked away in the attic. "Fire in the kitchen!" The oppressive heat of the New Orleans night clung to Auntie Eliza like a shroud, making the kitchen air thick and cloying. Sweat beaded on her forehead, trickling down her temples as she stirred a simmering pot of gumbo, the aroma of spices doing little to mask her unease. That locked attic door, the one Madame LaLaurie had so strictly forbidden, had gnawed at her all day. A shiver, unrelated to the sweltering temperature, snaked down her spine. A small, unattended pot of rendered fat on a back burner began to smoke, a thin, acrid ribbon spiraling towards the ceiling. Eliza, distracted by her own unsettling thoughts, didn't notice immediately. The smoke thickened, growing bolder, until a faint crackling sound drew her attention. Her eyes widened. A tongue of orange flame, small and tentative at first, licked at the pan's edge. "Saints preserve us!" she whispered, dropping her stirring spoon with a clatter. She grabbed a damp cloth, her movements jerky with panic, and lunged towards the burgeoning blaze. But the fat, now fully ignited, roared to life, with terrifying speed. The small flame blossomed into a hungry beast, leaping from the pot to the nearby linen towel, then to the wooden shelf above. Within seconds the kitchen, once a place of comforting warmth, transformed into a fiery inferno. Smoke, thick and black as pitch, billowed from the rapidly consumed shelves, stinging Eliza's eyes and clawing at her throat. She coughed, a dry, racking sound, as the heat intensified, pressing in on her from all sides. The delightful scent of gumbo was replaced by the acrid stench of burning wood and fabric. "Help!" she shrieked, her voice thin and reedy against the crackle and roar of the flames. "Fire! Madame, help me!" The kitchen door, her only clear escape, was now a wall of fire, the wooden frame engulfed in a furious dance of orange and red. The windows, too, offered no respite, framed by curtains that had erupted into fiery banners. Eliza stumbled backward, gasping for air that was growing thinner with each frantic breath. The heat was unbearable, scorching her skin, making her clothes feel like they were about to ignite. She could hear the distant shouts now, the rising clamor of the neighborhood roused by the glow painting the night sky. The fire bells of the city, at first faint, began to clang with increasing urgency. But inside the blazing kitchen, the world had shrunk to a terrifying prison of smoke and flame. Auntie Eliza scrambled for a moment, her hands searching blindly for anything to douse the inferno. But there was nothing. The pantry door, a dark silhouette against the fiery backdrop, was too far, too blocked. The air grew heavy, the oxygen rapidly consumed by the hungry blaze. She could feel the searing heat radiating from the floorboards, the walls, the very air she tried to breathe. Her vision blurred, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks, not just from the smoke, but from the terrifying realization that she was truly, utterly trapped. Outside, the chaos was a stark contrast to the mansion's usual quietude. Neighbors pointed, gasped, and whispered. Soon, the LaLaurie household was a beacon of destruction. Yet, Madame Delphine LaLaurie herself emerged from the inferno's shadow, her silk dressing gown immaculate, her expression serene, almost amused. She watched the frantic efforts of the fire brigade with an unnerving calm. Later, city officials, their faces grave but their words carefully chosen, would declare the incident a tragic accident, a servant's carelessness. The whispers in the city, however, spoke of bought justice and a darkness far more profound than any accidental flame, the terrible secret. The acrid scent of burning wood and singed fabric choked the humid night air. Screams, raw and desperate, tore through the usual quiet of Royal Street. Marie, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, stumbled out of her family's courtyard, the orange glow from Madame LaLaurie's mansion painting the cobblestones a terrifying hue. Neighbors, roused from their slumber, poured onto the street, many already clutching buckets. "Fire! The LaLaurie house is on fire!" someone shrieked, the words barely audible over the crackle and roar. Marie's father, his face grim, shoved a heavy bucket into her hands. "Help, Marie! Auntie Eliza might still be inside." They joined the chaotic procession, a human chain ferrying water from the communal pump. The heat emanating from the mansion was intense, scorching Marie's skin even from a distance. Smoke billowed from the kitchen windows, thick and black, promising suffocation. Men shouted orders, their voices strained. Women cried, their wails adding to the cacophony of destruction. "More water! We need more water upstairs!" a burly baker yelled, his face streaked with soot. The fire's spreading to the attic. A group of them, including Marie's older brother Pierre, ventured inside. The lower floors were a terrifying inferno, but the grand staircase, for now, remained passable. Marie watched, her breath catching in her throat, as they disappeared into the choking smoke. Minutes later, a different kind of sound erupted from within. Not the frantic shouts of firefighting, but a sudden, piercing shriek, followed by a chorus of gasps and retching. Pierre reappeared at the top of the stairs, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a horror Marie had never witnessed. "There's a room," he choked out, pointing a trembling finger deeper into the attic. "Locked. We broke it down." Curiosity, cold and sharp, cut through Marie's fear. She pushed past the other dazed neighbors and began to climb the stairs, the acrid smoke stinging her eyes. The attic was a labyrinth of shadows, illuminated by the flickering orange glow from below. A splintered door, clearly recently forced open, stood ajar. A terrible, cloying smell, sickly sweet and metallic, emanated from within. Marie peered into the darkness. At first she saw only jumbled shapes, grotesque in the dim light. Then her eyes adjusted, and the tableau of unspeakable cruelty materialized. Shackles glinted on walls. Tools of a kind no decent person owned lay scattered on a blood-stained table. Figures, emaciated and broken, were chained in various positions of agony. One, a woman, her eyes hollow, turned her head slowly, a silent plea in her gaze. Another, barely more than a child, lay limp, a crude gag stuffed in her mouth. The horror was palpable, a suffocating blanket. A collective groan of revulsion rippled through the small group. A woman screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Men gasped, several turning away to vomit. The fire for a moment was forgotten, overshadowed by this far more chilling discovery. Later, as the last embers smoldered, and the true extent of the mansion's secret was laid bare, Madame Delphine LaLaurie stood on her charred porch, remarkably composed. Her silks were unruffled, her voice calm as she addressed the arriving city officials. Auntie Eliza, they reported, had been found in the kitchen, consumed by the flames, the fire tragically her own doing. Marie, watching from the periphery, saw the knowing glances exchanged between the officials and Madame LaLaurie. A silent bargain struck. The true horror of the attic, it seemed, would be buried with the ashes, and with Auntie Eliza. Justice, Marie realized with a bitter taste in her mouth, was a luxury only some could afford, gone forever. The air itself vibrated with a low, guttural growl that had been building since dawn. Marie stood at the edge of the swelling crowd, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. News of the grisly discovery had spread like wildfire, mutating with each telling, yet the core horror remained. Children had been found, burned, tortured. And the official pronouncement? An unfortunate accident. A kitchen fire. The lie hung thick and putrid in the humid air, an insult to every citizen's intelligence. Accident, they say. A blacksmith roared, his brawny arms crossed, face contorted in a mask of fury. When a man's own eyes have seen the chains. A chorus of agreement surged, a wave of outrage that threatened to break the elegant iron gates of the LaLaurie Mansion. The house, usually a beacon of refined society, now loomed like a tomb, its pristine white facade a chilling contrast to the dark whispers that clung to its every brick. Marie squeezed her eyes shut, the image of the small, charred bodies seared into her memory. Justice, she thought, was a fickle mistress, easily bought and sold in this city. Suddenly, a ripple of movement emanated from the carriage house. A sleek, black conveyance, usually reserved for leisurely afternoon drives, was being hastily hitched. A collective gasp, then a roar, erupted from the crowd. "She's trying to flee!" someone shrieked, the words cutting through the general clamor. Madame LaLaurie, a vision in deep amethyst silk, emerged from a side door, her movements precise and unhurried. Her silver hair, usually meticulously coiffed, was slightly askew, a single strand escaping its elaborate pins. Yet her composure remained unnerving. Her gaze swept over the angry faces, not with fear, but with an almost imperious disdain. She held a small, embroidered reticule, the only possession she apparently deemed worthy of taking, as she stepped towards the waiting carriage. A young man, his face blotchy with tears and anger, darted forward, throwing a rotten tomato that splattered against the carriage door with a sickening thud. Madame LaLaurie flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor, but quickly regained her regal bearing. "Murderess!" a woman shrieked, her voice cracking with grief. "You'll not escape God's judgment." The coachman, a nervous sweat beading on his brow, urged the horses forward. But the crowd was no longer merely shouting, it was moving, a living, breathing entity of vengeance. Cobblestones, then larger stones, began to fly, rattling off the carriage's lacquered sides. The horses, spooked by the projectiles and the furious din, whinnied and bucked, threatening to overturn the carriage. "Drive, you fool, drive!" Madame LaLaurie's voice, though low, carried an icy command that even in that maelstrom of chaos pierced the air. The coachman whipped the horses mercilessly, guiding them through the throng, which parted reluctantly, still pelting the retreating vehicle with whatever they could find. Marie watched, a strange mix of vindication and despair swirling within her. LaLaurie was gone, driven out, but the stench of her crimes, and the silence of the officials would linger. Hours later, as dusk settled, a heavy quiet descended upon Royal Street. The crowd had dispersed, leaving behind a trail of trampled refuse and a profound sense of exhaustion. Marie stood across the street, gazing at the deserted mansion. Its windows, once gleaming with artificial light, were now dark, like empty eye sockets. The grand doors, usually flung open to welcome the city's elite, were shut tight, promising nothing but cold, desolate spaces within. No smoke curled from the chimneys. No soft glow emanated from behind the drawn curtains. It stood as a mute testament, an elegant shell that whispered of unspeakable horrors, forever a scar on the heart of New Orleans.